all the exercises because there's a lot of content, so it's hard to cover all the content. So I suggest that you go through the content yourself, and let's go through the exercises. This is you. Today we'll be doing Unit 3 and Unit 4. There's 3 pathways in each unit. So this is the first pathway in Unit 3. First question is, which of the following is a valid way to define a data class in Kotlin? Let's look through the options. First, we have data class person. So you have to define it by saying data class. So it's either option A or option D. And this is the syntax to provide the parameters. So it is option A. So you just need to remember the syntax for this question. Next, when using a sealed class, all direct subclasses must be in the same package. This is true, right? If the subclasses are present in different packages, then it won't recognize those subclasses. Third, when using generics, the generic data type goes inside. So for lists, you'll use square brackets. For objects, you use curly brackets. You use parentheses for functions. And for generics, you use angular brackets. So it's option D. A dash class is useful when you have a fixed set of values. When you have a fixed set of values, you use enum class. So this is just something you need to remember. To create a list object that has the ability to change its size, you would call what? So whenever we're talking about lists, this is not just in Kotlin. In any programming languages, in any programming language, whenever we talk about a list, we talk about whether it's mutable or immutable. If you look at the first option, it says modifiable list of. We never use the word modifiable when we talk about lists. We call it either mutable or immutable. For example, in Python, mutable and tuples are considered to be immutable, right? So it has the ability to change its size. That means you can modify it. So it's mutable. Option D, mutable list of. So even if you don't know the answer, just by looking at the question, you can kind of guess the answer. So this is a multiple answer question. Which of the following are higher order functions? Map is a higher order function. Arrange by is not. Filter and for each are also higher order functions. So most of these bits are just things that you need to memorize. Given the following line of code, which of the following commands will print blue? If you look at the code, we have 3 elements in the list, right? You have red, green, and blue. And the elements will always start with zero. This red is the 0th element, green is the first element, and blue is the second element. So we have to print the second element. So the first option is correct because this is the syntax to print the second element. And even option B is correct because you're using get method. So when you use get method, inside you have to provide the index as a parameter, and the index is 2. So option B is correct. Option C is wrong because it says colors dot contains 2. When you use the method called contains, the parameter is always the value, not the index. Here we are passing in the index instead of passing in the value, so it's wrong. And even fourth one is also wrong. This is not the correct way to print it. If you look at the eighth question, the programming concept of a class that has only one instance is called a dash. So we know that the instance of a class is nothing but an object. So a class that can only have one object. You can't have multiple objects of the same class. So, so you may be tricked into pressing option C because it says mono object, but it's actually singleton. You just need to know the programming terminology. Which of the following statements is true regarding sets and maps? A set must contain distinct values, and a map's keys must be distinct. Yes, option A is correct, right? You can't have repeating values, or in other words, you can't have duplicates in a set. Similarly, in the map, each map key should be different. If the same key is pointing to different values, then you won't know which value it's pointing to exactly, right? So you can have, so each key can appear only once in a map. So that's option A. If you have a variable named records, which is a collection to determine the number of items, it can't. Wait, let me go again. If you have a variable named records, which is a collection to determine the number of items it contains, you can call. You have to use the size attribute. Let's check. Okay, got everything right. We'll move on to the second pathway. So this pathway is all about scrollable lists. Scrollable lists is basically just a it's basically just a UI layout. It's a UI component in Compose. So we have the first question. Adaptive launcher icons for Android apps consist of a foreground and background vector drawable. Yes, that's true. You need both. When building a UI that requires a scrolling list with a variable number of items, which composable should you use? So it's a scrolling list. Each element is each element is vertical. Yes, each element is vertical. If the elements are arranged vertically, then it's a column. If the elements are arranged horizontally, it's a row, right? So we know that it's either option A or option C because it needs to be a column. But here they're saying a variable number of items. If you know the exact number of items, then you choose column. But we don't know the number of items. So we go with lazy column. It would be option C. What file type is used for the launcher icon foreground and background vectors? So this question doesn't just apply to launcher icon. It applies to almost any UI element. We know that in Android to build UI components, we use an XML file, right? But writing everything in XML is a it's not easy. That's why we're using Compose. But XML is the basis for UI components in Android development. So it's option D. Which composable should you use to create a vertically scrollable list with an undetermined number of items? We already got this question. So question 2 is repeating again. The options are different, but the question is same. Since we have an undetermined number of items, it's a lazy column. The column composable is not a good option for a list of items of unknown quantity because it's option A. It can only hold a small finite number of predefined items, but lazy column can hold an infinite number of predefined items. So if you know the number before, then you can go with column. Which method is used to add content to a lazy column composable? You use items. You use items method to add the content. Which composable arranges items horizontally? So you use a column to arrange them vertically, right? Similarly, to arrange them horizontally, you use a row. Which composable arranges items vertically? As I just said, it's a column. Vertical means column, horizontal means row. Wait, which composable should you use to create a vertically scrollable grid? Okay, vertically scrollable grid. If you're talking about grid, then it's a lazy vertical grid. Let me reload the page again. Here they're saying vertically scrollable grid. So we have to go with lazy vertical grid. So that's true. It's option B. Now we'll solve the third pathway. In this pathway is all about theming, the color themes that you use and all that. So animations in your Android app can, yes, they can add visual cues. They make your app look more polished. So it would be all of the above. This is just a conceptual question. Spring animation is based on start and end values over the specified duration. No, because spring animation means first it will in the first phase it will accelerate, and in the second phase it will decelerate, right? So just by knowing the start and end values you won't be able to make a spring animation. You also need to know how much it accelerates and how much it decelerates. So next, dampening ratio and stiffness. Yes, because stiffness will determine how quickly it will accelerate. So it's option B. Spring animation is a physics based animation. That's true, because whenever we talk about acceleration and deceleration, that's a physics based concept, right? So it's true. In the material theming, the dash color is the color displayed most frequently. Obviously you'll see the primary color more frequently, right? Because primary color is used more often than any other color. So it would be option A. The following file is used to define shapes of components in Compose. Use the shape.kt file. So the answer is right in the question. You can only have one preview composable. That's not true. You can have any number of previews. A hex color code starts with a pound character and is followed by six letters and or numbers that represent the red, green, blue components of the color. This is true, right? A hex code will look something like this. So a hex code will look something like this. First, it will start with the hashtag, and you'll have hexadecimal values right next to it. So it's true. The dash file is the file that holds all the information about the theme of the app. Theme.kt. So the answer is right in the question. Dash creates contrast between the card and the background to add a shadow. So to add a shadow, we need an elevation, right? When the elevation is zero, you won't have any shadow. And the when the elevation is 1 or 100%, you'll have a shadows. So elevation determines the thickness of the shadow and also how dark the shadow is. So it's elevation. So to modify the shadow, you need to modify the elevation. Which are the reasons that some may use dark theme on their device? It can reduce power usage. That's true because the screen is emitting less light. So obviously the power usage will reduce. It improves visibility for users with low vision. That's true as well. So it's all of the above. And it also makes it easier for anyone to use device in a low light environment. So all of them are true. Talkback allows a user to navigate an app using switches instead of touchscreen. That's not true because if you're using Talkback, that means you don't want to use the touchscreen or the switches. So this is an alternative for using the touchscreen and the switches. That means it's false. It has nothing to do with the touchscreen and switches. Which attribute allows Talkback to speak a meaningful representation of an image or icon? So we are humans. So if someone asks us to explain an image, we can explain the image. But obviously Android can't do that. So we need to provide a content description for every image. Content description is nothing but it's just a parameter for when you build an image. So when you pass in the argument as a string, the talkback will basically just read the string that you passed in. So if you provide the content description, it will be able to explain the image. Let's check. Okay, all of them are true. So we finished the first three pathways of Unit 3, and there's three more pathways in Unit 4. So open Unit 4. Okay, let me drink some water. If you have any questions, type it in the question answer section. Let's start with part 1 of Unit 4. Which method is first called when the app no longer has focus? So if the app is not in focus, on pause is called. This is basically just like an event. It will trigger the on pause event basically. So when you use on stop function, the app won't be visible on the screen. Use dash to write a debug message. That would be log.d. You need to use the d method. Okay. To save a value that needs to survive a configuration change, declare its variable with, remember savable, right? So these are just bits that you need to remember. You know, there's no need to apply any logic here. You just need to remember the names. The separation of concerns The separation of concerns design principle states that the app should be divided into classes, each with separate responsibilities. App should be divided into classes, each with separate responsibilities. That's true. The UI is what the user sees, while the UI state is what the app says they should see. That's also true. UI is just the interface, but UI state is provided inside the code. So the app will first check the UI state, and based on that, it will change the UI. According to the recommended app architecture, each application should have at least the following two layers. Yes, it needs to have both UI and data layer. State flow is a data holder observable flow that emits the current and new state updates. That's true. Previously, I said, right, for a Spring animation, having the current and new state is not enough. But here it's saying it emits the current and new state. So emits means this is the output. It will output the current and new state updates. But to create the animation, you need to also provide other information such as the stiffness, etc. Which of the following configurations should be added to the build or gradle file to add dependencies for the unit test source code? It would be test implementation. You just need to remember the name. Unit tests are executed on an Android device or emulator. No. If you're doing a manual test, like if you're looking for bugs in an app, then you can first run the app on an Android device or an emulator, and you can start searching for the bugs. But when we talk about unit tests, they are automated. You don't need to do them manually. Since they're automated, they don't have to be executed. Okay, next pathway. This pathway is all about navigating between different pages. Like, how do you navigate between pages? Like, do you backtrack, or do you follow the hierarchy of the pages to navigate? So all that is covered in this pathway. A root is defined with which data type? It's a string. With a nav host, you must explicitly specify a starting screen. Yes, that's true. You need this starting screen. It's considered best practice to not pass a nav host controller to individual composables. That's just unnecessary to pass it to individual composables. So this is not the best practice. Dash is a composable that manages which screen is displaced based on a given route. So it would be nav host, right? This pathway is all about how we use nav host. The composable function called in a nav host takes which two parameters? Yes, you need the root, and you also need the content. The root will tell you the hierarchy basically. You can change the currently displayed root using the dash method. So it will be navigate, right? You need to use the navigate method. Which method removes one or more screens from the backstack? So backstack is nothing but a stack. It's right in the name. And when we talk about stacks, if you're adding a value, then that means you're pushing a value. And if you're removing a value, that means you're popping a value. So pop backstack. So this is just basic programming terminology. In a multi-screen app, navigating to a new screen puts it on the bottom of the backstack. That's not true. When you navigate to a new screen, it will be put on the top of the backstack. You can't add anything to the bottom of the stack, right? whatever which value, any value that you push onto a stack will be on the topmost position. So this would be false. Intent intent dash contains additional data passed to an intent. So additional data will, so it would be intent extras. Extras means additional data. State flow is a data holder observable flow that emits the current and new state updates. That's true. This question, I think this question came in one of the previous pathways. It will emit both the current state and also the new state updates. So it's a repeated question. Which of the following are true about the back and up buttons? The back button is a system button, right? Like if you check your phone on the bottom right corner, you can find the back button, regardless of which app you use. So it's a system button. The up button is provided by the system at the bottom of the screen. No, that's actually the back button, not the up button. The back button is a part of the app bar. That's also false. The up button is part of the app bar, but not the back button. Next option. The up button in the app bar automatically navigates to the previous screen. No, that would be the back button, not the up button. Up button takes you to the previous screen based on the hierarchy, but the back button will take you to the previous screen based on the like it will take you to the most recently opened screen. So this is the back button, not the up button. The back button only appears if you use navigation. What? The back button only appears if you use navigation. It has nothing to do with navigation. It will just open the most recent screen. So this would also be false. So the last option is the up button can be shown or hidden depending on the current screen. Yes, that's true. Because back button is a system button, so it is always visible. But the up button is shown on the nav bar. So based on the nav bar, it may be visible or it may be hidden. So last option is true. Okay, everything's right. So this is the last pathway of this unit. It's about making your app more responsible. Being responsive means the app should function properly regardless of the size of the screen. It should The layout should look good even on a smaller screen and also on a larger screen. Let's do the quiz. The dash composable is used to respond to the back button with or without a nav host. That would be a back handler. You don't have to remember the names of every composable, but at least you need to remember the names of the basic composables that you use often inside an app. Which of the following are true about designing for larger screens? So this is a multiple answer question, so that we need to go through each and every option. Button positioning is more important on larger screen sizes. This is true. Because if a button is present in the middle of a screen, it can be harder to press it. So you need to be much more careful about button positioning when the screen is larger. Usually no changes are needed to the UI layout to make the app work well for larger screen sizes. That's not true. You need When you make an app responsive, you need to make sure that it functions well on smaller screens and also on larger screens. And if you use the same layout for both smaller and larger screens, it will look off. Since you have more space in a larger screen, you will generally have more components displayed on a larger screen. So this would be false. You can't use the same layout. Option C. Adding another layout to the same screen removes the need to navigate between screens. Yes, you can do this. So basically, to explain this, I need an image. Like, let's say you're using a medium sized screen in a portrait mode. If you want to open the settings, you click on the nav button, right? So the settings menu and the main screen, they're both separate on a smaller screen with portrait orientation. But if you're using a larger screen, you can display both the settings and also the main content, because the screen width is larger. If you're using a tablet, then the screen width is quite high, right? So you can display multiple layers at the same time. So option C is true. Large screen layouts should avoid placing commonly used buttons in the center of the screen, because when the screen is large, it will be hard to reach the center of the screen. So the button should be placed towards the edge. So option A, C, and D. What is a specific measurement of width or height where an app's layout should change? That's a breakpoint. So how do you distinguish between a small screen, a large screen, and a medium screen? Like, how large should the screen be in order to call it a large screen? Because you generally have three separate layouts. You'll have one layout for a small screen, one layout for a medium screen, and one layout for a large screen. But the app won't know what should be considered a large screen and what should be considered a small screen, right? So that's why you use breakpoints. So if the width increases by, so you just say, like, let's say that 100 pixels is a breakpoint. So if the width of the screen exceeds 100 pixels, then we call it a large screen. That's why you use breakpoints. It's basically a threshold value. The compact with window size class The compact with window size class generally refers to smaller devices such as phones in a portrait mode. That's true. Compact width means we're talking about smaller screens. In portrait mode, the width will be low, so it's true. The Dash API makes the implementation of adaptive layouts simpler. So you use size class API for that. A navigation rail is often appropriate for Dash with layouts. It's compact, standard, medium, and expanded. So it's actually used in all of these layouts, but it's mostly used in medium width layouts. Navigation rail means on the bottom of the screen you'll have a rail, right? You'll have multiple buttons placed horizontally. So if you want to switch between different screens, you just click on, for that you use navigation rail on the bottom of the screen. So I think it's medium width layout, but I'm not 100% sure. So let's check after this. When building apps with adaptive layouts, you should use a single preview for each screen. That's false. As I said before, you can use multiple previews. You're not limited to a single preview. This doesn't just apply for adaptive layouts, it applies for any layout. The list detail layout requires back navigation on compact screens, but not on screens where both the list and detail screens are shown at once. That's true. List detail layout means on the left side of the, but not on screens where both the list and detail screens are shown at once. So what does this mean? The list detail layout means on the left side of the screen, you'll have a list of, let's say, different pages. Or let's say you're in a settings menu. If you ever open the settings menu in a tablet, you'll see that on the left side you have multiple options on the list, different settings. When you click on when you click on an element of the list, The details regarding the element will be shown on the right side. This only happens on larger screens because there's more width. So you can display both list and detail screens. But when you're using a medium device, you either see only the list or the detail screen. So when you click on an element of a list, you'll be taken to the detail screen, and this is true. Ninth one. Assume you assume you have a contacts app that displays a list of contacts and has details to show for each contact. For each contact, what are appropriate ways to adapt the UI to different screen sizes? We will go through each option. Use the list detail layout to show one pane or two panes side by side depending on the available width of the screen. So this is what I explained in the this is what I explained in the previous question. If you're using a screen with less width, you can either show the list or the details screen. But if the width of the screen is higher, then you can display both the list and also the detail. So option A is true. You don't need to check the other options because there's only one option that's correct. Tests can be configured to run only test functions with custom annotations by configuring the dash. That would be the instrumentation arguments. You don't Whenever you test an app, you don't have to test each and every function because in some functions you generally don't have any bugs. So sometimes you only want to check you only want to test some specific functions. So if you test each and every function, it will take a lot of time. So to save the time, you use instrumentation arguments. So only the functions that have instrumentation arguments will be tested and the other functions won't be tested. So that way you're saving a lot of time. Okay, all right. So that's the end of fourth pathway. I'll stop sharing my screen. So if you have any questions, type it in the chat box. I'll wait for 1 more minute. If there's no questions, then we can end the meeting. It seems like we don't have any questions. So thanks for attending today's session. Okay, I'm ending the session. Thank you for joining.